Howdy, and welcome to the Petrus Development Show, where we discuss fundraising in the religious sector and how generosity and giving impacts both the organization and the donor. From campus ministries to high schools, from universities and faith-based nonprofits to Catholic parishes, we bring you stories, insights, and best practices that will inspire, educate, and inform you to go out and raise more money for your ministry and the kingdom. God bless, and thank you for joining us today. Howdy, and welcome to episode 129 of the Petrus Development Show. I'm delighted to introduce you to Matt Watson today. Mr. Watson is Deputy Superintendent for Aristoi Classical Academy in Katy and Cypress, Texas. I have worked with Mr. Watson as part of the consulting solutions the Petrus offers, and I invited him to join me today so we could discuss education, charter schools, and the challenges of fundraising in education. Mr. Watson's also a fellow history buff, and so I really enjoyed this opportunity to talk history on the show. I very much hope you'll enjoy my conversation with Mr. Watson as much as I did. As always, be sure to stick around for my 3 takeaways. Well, howdy, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of the Petrus Development Show. I'm thrilled that you're with us here today. Today, I have Mr. Matthew Watson, Deputy Superintendent for Aristoi Classical Academy in Cypress, Texas. And I've gotten to know Mr. Watson through projects that we've been working on. We've been doing a feasibility study for them in 2022, and it's just been a joy to be able to work with Matt and to work with, of course, the whole team over there at Aristoi, Brenda Davidson, Natalie DeJong, all the folks over there have been fantastic. But I thought I would have Mr. Watson come join us today to talk a little bit about charter schools, talk about classical education, talk about fundraising in general, but really just kind of a opportunity for you, the audience, to learn a little bit more about charter school education and probably some tidbits of information that you didn't know or you had misunderstandings about. We will hopefully clear up today. So with all that said, Matt, I thank you for joining me and for being part of the call.
Thank you, Andrew. I'm really excited about this.
Great. Tell us a little bit about your background. How did you come to be the Deputy Superintendent of Aristoi Classical Academy?
Sure. Well, the short version, and then you can ask me about anything that piques your interest or that you think your audience might want to know more about. My first year out of college, I taught at the private Christian school that my wife and I graduated from. That's in Portland, Oregon. Best year of my life at that point. I taught high school and just really, really found a vocation to teach and to mentor and coach and just that helping along of young people into adult life. As I was getting to the end of that year, right or wrong, the way we look back on our decisions sometimes, in my youthful ambition, I thought, well, this is great. And I didn't understand at that point, I think, how great that was and how great it would have been to just camp out at a school long term, just grow with it, for better or worse. And it's turned out better, I think. I decided I needed to go to graduate school and study history, which I had majored in as an undergraduate. So I made this decision in the spring and looked around for programs that were still open, knowing that I wanted to study early American history. Went off to the University of Massachusetts at Amherst to do that and had a great time there. Continued intellectual awakening after my undergraduate years. But as I was contemplating in that graduate program becoming a professor, like those professors that I TA'd for, I kept remembering that year teaching high schoolers and the relationship I was able to have with them. The way I put it is that while you're in high school, you can still say to a young person, you can do, you can be whatever you want, whatever you can dream up. But you get to college and kind of the great sorting begins and people are kind of sorted into their potential in many ways. There's more distance. There's less community, even in a vibrant college classroom, than you can have when you're working in a school community K through 12. So with that in mind and coming to the end of my master's program at UMass Amherst, instead of pursuing doctorate programs in history, as long as we were in New England and we had family reasons for wanting to stay in New England a little longer. I applied to all the ed schools, graduate schools of education that were kind of the top names in the education field on the East Coast and actually on the West Coast as well. And got into Harvard Graduate School of Education. Couldn't pass up going to the school that so many of my favorite people in American history had passed through in their various educational journeys. And so we went there and pursued a Master of Education. Now, at this time, I was married, I had two young children. So, all this 5-year sojourn in New England, there's a lot of scrapping. So I did things like work in college. What would you call it? Like not snack bar. What's a step up from a snack bar?
Oh gosh.
At the student union
Yeah. I don't know. Gift shop.
cafe.
Oh yeah.
For
Cafe.
the
We'll go with
student
that.
union. I
Yeah.
don't think they called it that, but I worked there at Amherst College, with hairnet and everything.
Hmm.
I was on a hardwood floor crew. Hardwood floors are huge
Okay.
in New England, and refinished and reinstalled hardwoods in a lot of historic homes and
Nice.
buildings during that time. Probably some other thing. Oh, worked at a hotel and studied at night for a while. So kind of a great American adventure
Hmm.
going through there, and then went to Harvard. I graduated from Harvard in 2009, and I had it in my mind that I was going to work at a public school in a big ISD, probably in an urban area, because that's kind of I think the prevailing vision in those elite ed, ironically perhaps, but the prevailing vision in those elite ed schools that the real thing to do is to go and work in an urban school district.
Interesting.
And there are a lot of noble thoughts behind that. And I applied for those, and at a time when a lot of the big districts were laying off teachers in that Great Recession timeframe. And I started as well applying to Catholic schools. I was Catholic. I'd actually converted while in New England. So this was something I just was kind of beginning to be open to. The one job I got, and I can say this now, I don't have to pad this. The one job I was offered was here in the Houston area of Texas, St. John the 23rd, although
Hmm.
it was Pope John at that time. St. John the 23rd in Katy, Texas, to teach history. So we moved down here, and I taught history and government and economics, and eventually became department chair, dean of houses. So we started a house system while I was there that is still a part of their student life program. And I think it was really at this time I was in love with teaching, and
Yeah.
that brought me to graduate school. I was in love with history, with ideas, with literature, and that got me to graduate school. But as I was at St. John the 23rd and under a great principal there, Tim Peterson, he gave me opportunities to lead. I don't know how much that was based on potential or just based on, oh, that this young guy thinks he knows everything. He knows what the next step is here or there. Let's give him a chance. So he gave me opportunities, and I'd say it was there at St. John that I really began to think of myself as an educational leader, seek to grow in that. Another thing that happened during that time, there were a number of us who were young men in the same age cohort. We all just coincidentally had graduated high school in 99. And so there were like 5 of us. We were looking at the curriculum of St. John, this Catholic preparatory school, becoming aware, and most of them were much more aware than I was, of the Catholic intellectual and artistic tradition, the arts tradition, literary tradition of Christendom, and recognizing that that's not what was driving our curriculum. It was luminaries like the College Board or Texas
Yeah.
Education Agency.
Yeah.
Of course, when you're young and you think you've hit on something, and you think God's on your side, look out. So we were really advocating for a more liberal arts turn. in the education there, and accomplishing that individually in our classes in many ways. We were admiring emerging classical charter networks like
Yeah.
Great Arts in Arizona. We got a hold of their curriculum synopsis and just were blown away that a publicly funded school was doing this and a Catholic school was not, at least programmatic level. Becoming aware of that, I also became aware, first as a parent, of Aristoi Classical Academy
Mm.
that's here in Katy. My daughter ended up going there when we were looking for kindergarten, and she started her schooling there. But it only went through eighth grade, and I didn't see myself teaching there, and there
Yeah.
were openings to lead somehow. And I forget exactly how I came across it, but I found an ad that they were looking for an assistant headmaster to build their school into the high school years, to take it from K through 8 to a K through 12. So I saw that and instantly knew that's what I needed to do. It was the next step as a leader in schools, but also this was a movement, and this was a school that was actually even closer to my house than my Catholic school. And I would have the opportunity to immerse in this movement. And going into it, my plan was okay, about 5 years, and I'll take what I learned and I'll take it back to Catholic schools. And so I went in with that. Brenda Davidson was the headmaster at that point. She was kind enough to bring me on, and the years I was there, I learned a lot from her, and we were able to be successful building a K through 12 school, having a couple graduating classes, and building enrollment year upon year. And in doing that in the midst of a destination school district, Katy ISD. People move to this area to go send their kids to Katy ISD. And we were putting up portable buildings in a field and saying, no, 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 this is what you need to do.
Yeah.
And meanwhile, there's like a $60 million football stadium going up right down the street. We're planting our flag for classical liberal arts education. There was a response. And we also were able to bring on board some really great teachers, many of whom are still here, who were attracted to the role of the teacher at a classical liberal arts school, because you're not just following a binder and parroting, the truisms of the day. You're really required to be a master of your subject and to draw your students into apprenticeship in that subject. And so we've, I think, been able to punch above our weight in the quality of teachers we got over those years. But as 5 years was coming up, and I was a few semesters into doctorate in educational leadership, and kind of remembering that commitment to Catholic education. I was open, and I was contacted by a school in San Antonio, the Atonement Catholic Academy. They were about to the next year celebrate their 25th anniversary. Been through a number of headmasters over the years, and enrollment was in free fall, and was able to go and help them turn that around over the course of 3 years. I don't know how serious the commitment to classical liberal arts was there, and there's, I know you work with a lot of Catholic schools, so I want to tread lightly.
Mm-hmm.
Ultimately, they wanted to go to a president principal model. The priest, when he had asked me to come, wanted nothing to do with the school, and then as it turned around, he lobbied. I mean, from what I understand from the behind the scenes, lobbied the bishop to be in that president role, and I was not as convenient anymore. But it's funny, during our time in San Antonio, which is a beautiful city and just right there near the hill country. And I know you and I both like to hike and camp, and
Mm-hmm.
there's no 14,000 foot peaks in the hill country.
Right.
We can admit that. But if you're going to live in Texas, it's nice to live near that and be able to just get out there pretty easily. And you can just be out of cell range,
Yep.
have a little elevation to work with. And we really, really like that. During our years there, we just kind of chalked it up to one of the sacrifices one makes in following God's leading, that we had to give up Aristoi and we had to give up Katy.
Yeah.
Again, this is our interpretation. We may all find out someday just how misled the Watsons have been at various points, and particularly Mr. Watson. But so we're there. Life starts to seem short once you get about midway through, and you're just like, well, man, we did not realize what we had, but it's just one of those things
Yeah.
that we will get returned to us one way or another as we are faithful to what we need to do right now. So Brenda stayed in touch over those 3 years, and Brenda, she always has plans. She always has plans, and a lot of them have come to fruition.
Absolutely. Yep.
And some of them, maybe in a year or two, we're going to see some surprises. She often has plans for the people around her.
Mm.
And so she would say to me that, yeah, I think we have this role or that role at Aristoi. And it's like, Brenda, I that sounds really good. And I would probably be happier doing that, but I need to be faithful to this for now.
Yeah.
If I feel released at some point, you're my first call. In the spring of this past year, she started talking seriously about needing a deputy superintendent. We now have 3 campuses. We're looking at a fourth potentially this fall or the next, and the board is laying out plans for multiple campuses over the next 10 years. There was a need for that, and I love the strategic architectural thinking about
Mm-hmm.
waging a campaign that way and finding the people who are going to just love carrying out the different parts of a push like that, a strategic push. Unexpectedly, we were able to come back in July and rejoin this movement. And I'll tell you, since being back, and in part due to you and your Petrus Associates visits and vision refining work that you've led us through, I just feel more momentum than ever around here, and people are excited about what the future holds.
That's awesome. There's a lot of points in that story. The point that I'll make is in 2009, I guess it was Pope John the 23rd. You must have worked with Keith Myers then as
Oh
the
yeah,
yeah. So Keith, good friend of mine, we still stay in touch. And my first job was at St. Mary's at Texas A&M. I took his job for him to leave and go to John the 23rd in Katy.
awesome.
It's always good to meet a friend of Keith. So
Yes, and I need to go find him. I emailed him, but I think
yeah.
it was an old email address. I just need to call him at the school or something. But yeah, he was great.
Yeah. So now you're back at Aristoi Classical Academy, talking about growth, talking about visioning, and as part of that, there will be fundraising, right? But in most people's minds that are listening, fundraising for a private school or a Catholic school makes sense because they're tuition funded and sponsor and donation funded. Public schools, on the other hand, are state funded and then receive federal funding as well. But charter schools are a unique blend somewhere in the middle. So, can you explain to our audience what it means to be a charter school and then what the financial model of a charter school is?
Most simply, a charter school is an entity that acts as its own district. So it may have one school, it may have 10. Those schools may be in one zip code, those schools may be across the state. But as an organization, it gets its permission or charter to operate schools with public monies directly from the state. Texas, that program's been around via legislation since the 1990s. In fact, Aristoi was one of the first charter schools
Wow.
founded. Now, the financial model, I think it's gotten more complex over the years. Charter schools have made gains. Public schools get their funds in a couple of ways. The primary way being for every student enrolled and every day that student attends, they get money from the state. And each legislative session, that amount per year that a student would get attending all days of the year is revisited by the legislature. Charter schools get that money, as do public ISD schools. What's different about the charters, lots of things, but when it comes to finances, the main thing that's different is that we get very little in the way of facilities funding. We really end up getting, I think it's down to like $100-something
Wow.
per student for facilities. And if you can imagine how expensive it's becoming to even hire and compensate teachers, that ends up being very little. The difference when it comes to public ISD schools, so I mentioned the $60 million football stadium before. An ISD that's operating in a municipality or in a county can go when it's election time and put an initiative on the ballot and say, we want to raise property taxes, by this fraction of a percent, and these monies will go to, this, that, and building new schools or improving facilities. And they are able, by the 51% mandate in those elections, to bring in tens, hundreds of millions of dollars, which I don't resent them
Right.
that, or can't think of the word, but I
Begrudge.
don't begrudge that, because they have tons of kids. That is the default option. And that is not a small task. The challenge that charter schools have is we can be a little more nimble. We're given a little more freedom curricularly. We can choose a mission. An ISD with a mission, that's just a hard thing for them to gather around. But we can gather around a mission, but we're left on our own largely when it comes to facilities. With that per pupil funding, often we can find leasing possibilities. I mean, it's kind of like, why would anyone not just want to rent? Well, you can advance your cause as a family by owning your house, gaining equity. Same challenge for a charter school. We need, though, an influx of capital to kind of boost us over that hump into the ownership of our own facilities. Facilities that are going to be anything other than, probably portable or very basic metal buildings. So that's where we begin to turn to fundraising and advancement activities.
So that's really helpful, because I've actually never thought about it in that way. And the way that you said that charter schools operate as their own district, right? So that gives them the flexibility, like you're saying, that ability to be nimble and to really kind of zero in on I don't want to say style of education, because that sounds, a little bit too simplistic, but this is how we are going to educate the students that are within our district. And this is
like a charism for a Catholic school that's actually meaningful to what we do, because we don't have 100,000 students.
Right. And so as proof of that, Aristoi teaches a classical style of education. Just real simply, explain to our listeners what that means. What is classical education?
Okay, so I'll try to keep it simple. The most basic way that I could say it is we try to step in as participants into Western civilization's tradition of education. So any time for the last 2,000 or 3,000 years, if you were a person of means, how would your children in Western civilization, how would you arrange for them to be educated? Whether it was you were hiring Aristotle, or you were sending them to a cathedral school, or to a British prep school or an American prep school, how would you have them educated? And it would be in that tradition of the classical liberal arts, which we're trying to live out as a community and draw students into as well that way of life.
We'll get back to the interview in just a second, but first, here's a quick message. So I've got a question for you. What could your ministry look like just a few years from now if you invest in your development program? Here's a glimpse into what the Cowboy Catholics at McNeese State University in Louisiana have accomplished since they started working with Petrus. First, they started with the foundation for their development efforts with the Petrus Annual Manual, and then took it to the next level with the Petrus Sustainable Development Program. Here's what their development director, Allie Livingston, had to say about the experience.
Before we got started with Petrus, we were raising about $130,000 just on our own, with some appeals and some random gifts that would come in and different parishioners that were wanting to support the student ministry. But over the last few years, we started with the annual manual, and we increased 23% of what we had raised the year before. So we were right about 160. And then in this past year, with the full coaching one-on-one consulting, we will probably end the year about 275. So it's been a huge increase in what we've been able to do, the money we've been able to raise. how we've been able to reach out to the students. It's just been a lot of growth in the last few years.
To learn more about the Petrus Annual Manual and Sustainable Development Programs, visit petrusdevelopment.com/services.
I think that's really great. And I saw something as a blog or as on Twitter, but they were talking about a lot of public education today is really about teaching students a skill or a trade that they can then sort of be successful in life. Whereas classical education is really a dialed in approach to teaching them how to be full of wonder and how to be more exploratory in their education and how they learn, so that wherever direction they feel called to go, they have the ability to not even just like critically think, but to wonder and to be open to possibilities that then they can develop skills in later in life.
Yeah, I think that's a great way to put it. So many modern approaches to education, it's a scripted life that they're envisioning. Whereas a liberal arts education, liberal meaning free, the education worthy of a free man, and often historically that meant an aristocratic man, a man who would rule, a man who had the means not to have to labor for his daily bread, but to pursue questions of truth and justice, and have the means not to be easily swayed by whether the outcome of a given question would affect him one way or another.
Wow, that was a loud blast of thunder.
Yes. There's some
You okay there?
Yes.
Okay.
It's probably already hit you.
It came through a little bit this morning, yeah. And then just kind of one final example is that Aristoi, in your mission is to develop a passion for learning that gives them the means to become responsible citizens of virtuous character, right? Which is, as you're saying, as a smaller school district that can select and can define your mission as you see it without the constraints or restraints of 50 years or 75 years of history. And this is how we've always done it. And we have thousands of school students, thousands of teachers. You can really kind of zero in on that as your mission, and a successful outcome of a student that goes through your school is that they are responsible citizens of virtuous character, which I think is fantastic.
Right. We make that character issue front and center, or not only training the mind, but we're always attempting to win the heart for these things.
So when you were with John the 23rd prep and then with Atonement, I imagine with John the 23rd, your exposure to fundraising may have been a little bit more limited just because you were sort of more involved in the teaching, but you said your principal was engaging you in some roles. Potentially at Atonement as head of school, you had more exposure to fundraising. Now at Aristoi, especially with some of the plans from the school and from the board of growth, and knowing now that facilities are not something that the educational system will help to fund, how do you see fundraising as being both, I guess, similar to what you were part of at these other Catholic schools, and then also uniquely different as a public charter school in the Houston area, I guess?
Wow. Okay. That's a great question. I think often you and I, as practicing Catholics, we know there's a Catholic world. I think sometimes when there's a Catholic school, that's enough for many people. Their parents, their grandparents supported the Catholic school. And when I get to a place of adulthood and financial stability, my kids are going, I'm supporting it. It's not only a good thing, something I'm in favor of, but in those circles, there's a social currency to it. We all understand what we're doing and why we're doing it. And often, unlike the early days of the parochial schools, when to be Catholic was probably to be impoverished, Catholics are more mainstream now, and they've reaped the benefits of their education system. Those who are continuing to send their kids are often people of means, because it's not a light commitment. And of course, especially knowing your work, I'm not saying that makes it easy and takes care of itself, but from sitting over in this vantage, that's something I see. Whereas you come in and you're a charter school, you're classical, no one is zoned to you. There's all these things that kind of make you this interloper. What I find is it's really about building relationships, and it's about being very clear about what you're doing. Because when you are a publicly funded school, every week it seems like there's a grant or there's an initiative or there's some kind of pull from state or federal education agencies that we're beholden to that is trying to draw in a direction that they see as good and probably is good. But all these things taken in aggregate just start to really dilute a mission. And so I see our challenge really as relationships and being faces set like Flint on our mission without the thing becoming stale. Then, as far as our constituency, one of the things that drew me, I think I emphasized the thinking of an educational purist when I told it before, but one of the things that drew me to Aristoi as well was I could tell anyone I ran into at the grocery store or walking in my modest teacher salary neighborhood, I could say, hey, you should consider sending your kids to Aristoi. And they could be in the next day and not a single dollar traded hands. And I would have invited them because I knew the education they'd be getting would be superior to anything around and would, as I said before, be seeking to win the heart for truth, goodness, and beauty of that child. And I loved being able to offer that to my community that I love. There's a beautiful and I think true diversity at charter schools. So since there's not this really pigeonholed zoning, not everyone's coming from the same neighborhood. People are drawn by the mission. And you will see that most clearly in like morning carpool because we don't have a bus system. Parents have to make a commitment and a sacrifice to go out of their way, drive their kids on the way to work or before their day starts and get them here. It's a choice and it's a sacrifice. But they drive through and you see all manner of cars, some that are barely running, some that are $200,000 cars. But it's because they're all drawn to this mission. And so you have a true diversity that I think is probably what people are talking about at its best when they're looking for diversity. Because we all come together not around celebrating each other's difference, but around celebrating what draws us together.
Yeah, so we started asking about, how fundraising is different and similar. Those are true aspects that are both challenges for a charter school, but then opportunities as well. And we didn't talk about it yet, or you mentioned one out in, I believe it was Arizona from a curriculum standpoint. But I'm curious, maybe you could share with our listeners, what are some of the charter school districts or networks that have managed to figure out fundraising really well and have been successful that maybe they would say, I didn't even realize that was a charter school, or I didn't realize that was a free school, just because of the success that they've seen, that someday we are hoping Aristoi would be part of that list. But who is on that list right now?
There are a lot of national groups, and I'm going to just distinguish between two groups. We've all heard of like KIP academies, Yes Prep, Idea schools, Harmony schools. And what these schools will often do is they'll go into a failing district near failing schools and they'll provide those parents, those families with failing could mean everything from, well, the state doesn't like their test scores to it is literally not safe and it's degrading to be in those schools. And they'll go into those spaces and they will offer an alternative that is disciplined, that is focused and well run to those parents, and where there's a name brand so they know what they're getting and there's success that can be pointed to, in the case of like a KIP all over the country.
And they're free to the end user as long as there is a slot available, right?
Exactly. So charter schools. What has tended to be a little different about charter schools, and I think the gold standard to date is Great Hearts, that I just was talking to someone there. I think they're up at 40 schools across several states. They started in Arizona. They're in Texas. They're in Florida. Quite a network. Classical charter schools will often not shy away from middle class areas where it can be more challenging just on the typical charter model to say, hey, you should reconsider the zone school that is down the street from that neighborhood you aspired to live in, for years and finally live in.
I.e. meaning not a failing school district, right?
Yes. So they can be successful because the argument is not like, here, your child, unlike there, is going to be safe or there's going to be actual education going on. It's the kind of education. And it's what the child is being educated for. And it's the vision of what it means to be human that is explicit rather than, tacitly dictated by the quote unquote 21st century economy or whatever other catchphrase drifts through in a given decade. So it's a different model, but those schools have been incredibly successful because many parents realize they're not just sending their kids to school to be safe, to pass certain tests, and to get a college acceptance. But those formative years are years of forming the soul. Their child is becoming the 40-year-old who will visit them at Christmas or not, and who will raise their grandchildren. That person is being formed in those years of K through 12 school. I think savvy parents want to be very clear and want it to be very transparent. Well, what is the end goal? What does it mean to be human in your school system? And how do you get there? And what traditions are you drawing on? And who are the authorities, the lights that are guiding you? And that's, I think, the space that classical charter schools come into that's a little bit different than these other successful and laudatory charter networks have come into.
Yeah, and I think especially, in kind of the years, it seems like focus on it has been magnified, no pun intended, 2020 to 2022, just with parents being made aware of some of what is being taught in public schools, and then feeling like there's more of a chance and an opportunity to stand up and to challenge those teachings, not always having those challenges being responded to with any sort of fundamental or institutional changes, right? And so then if I'm not happy with the public school system, even though it's a great system, it's safe for my kids, I don't have to have the worries that I would have, in another school district, I'm still not thrilled with the education and the style. So that's where I'm going to make a change for the benefit of my family, my kids, and their generations ahead. And that's where a charter school would become much more appealing as an option. And now, as more have grown and these networks are growing, and like you said, Aristoi has 3 campuses now with plans to add many more. There's just more options out there.
Yes, I realized I didn't answer your question because you asked about or how they've been successful fundraising.
Yeah.
So exactly, and I'm not an expert on Great Hearts, but I know that they've had corporate partners, individuals of means who from the beginning wanted a project like that to be successful, and success has begot success.
Just like you said, the charter schools are not afraid to say this is the line in the sand that we're drawing, and we're going to teach those donors, companies, or the individuals have said, I'm not afraid either. But that's kind of a bold move. As a fundraiser, you have to really develop those relationships, cultivate that, and then give them the space to be able to make a gift like that and feel honored that they are contributing to the work that they feel called to.
Well, exactly. And I think I can't speak from experience about that. I think Aristoi did not begin that way. It was more grassroots. It's pushed along through passion and the generosity of many. To date, have not had those partners that have allowed us to say, you know what, we're going to go into this area, and to help us make the case, to help us communicate what it is we're up to, we are going to build a school that reflects those values. And you walk in and you see classic art, you see simplicity, you see classrooms that are not huddled around stacks of iPads, but oriented either toward the teacher or in a Socratic circle. It'd be really nice to be able to go into communities and be able to signal through architecture how we're up to something different. So that's one of my hopes as we embark on the next level of seeking that support.
Well, I think that no good fundraising starts without a compelling vision, and then a clear message that is sharing that vision with the people that need to hear it and that will ultimately be the supporters. So I think that as you and the rest of the Aristoi team continue to develop that clear vision and then the messaging around it, I think that donors will be very interested and very keen to support it, just because there's so many things in the world that are much less clear, and there's much less clear benefit to society and to the end user, to some extent, than what you're doing there with charter classical education. And I think that I'm excited to see where it goes and how people come on board to join in mission with you.
Striking gold in the mountains of Colorado and surviving the sinking of the Titanic? Pioneering the juvenile justice system and helping to fund the building of the Denver Cathedral. These are just a few of the stories in the wild life of Margaret Brown. Hear more about her on the Holy Donors Podcast, Season 6, Unsinkable.
Well, Mr. Watson, I appreciate your taking the time and sort of shining some light on what charter schools are and what some of the fundraising challenges and opportunities are around it. I think this has been a really interesting conversation for a lot of our listeners who probably have very little understanding around charter schools and how that works. And so it's been very helpful. And I think that we'll put a pin in episode 2 for down the road when we can come back and talk about how some of these ideas that we're discussing now, how they have come to fruition through your work and the work of the team. I'm excited about that. Great. So now, what do you say we answer our lightning round questions?
Sounds good.
Okay, good. This is where the questioning gets really difficult, trust me.
The lightning round is brought to you by the Petrus Development Annual Manual. The Annual Manual provides a strong fundraising foundation, setting your organization up for long-term success. Each week, you will speak with a development consultant to keep you on track and help you excel. You will also receive access to dozens of how-to guides, samples, and templates to help you execute fundraising activities without having to reinvent the wheel. In addition, a development calendar and a weekly development task email will ensure that you know exactly what to focus on at each point in the year. Visit petrusdevelopment.com/annual manual to learn more.
And especially for a history major like yourself, you could go a million different directions here, as I know. Question number 1 in lightning round. If you could fundraise for any organization or cause at any point in history, what would it be?
How about Abraham Lincoln's second term?
Oh, wow. Yeah, there you go. Because at that point, was he a shoo-in for that second term, or was there still some work that had to be done?
You look at the broad sweeps, and he had to have been a shoo-in, but the more you look at it, he just had opposition all the way through. And, a battle would go one way. Okay, it's looking good. A battle goes another way. He's probably my favorite figure in American history. So I'd love to support him. Or if we were operating a little before the Civil War, I'd be interested in what kind of projects Henry David Thoreau had, or a little after, maybe helping John Henry Newman found his university that he didn't get to see through.
You got a great list there. One of my favorite books is Team of Rivals by Doris Kearns Goodwin.
Me too.
Love that book, and just love how he kind of going back to this, conviction of mission, how Lincoln never let the threat of getting, in this case, his rivals and people that were equipped to advance the mission of the country in the USA at that time. He probably did feel threatened and yet powered through it and able to assemble a team of rivals that really was what the country needed at the time. And he, as the leader, was able to manage them. So I've always loved that book.
Well, and the thing, the amazing and daunting, humbling thing is not only were they rivals who, in many cases, wanted his job in one way or another, had not gotten it, but that over their time of working with him, almost to a man, they came to the conclusion that he was the greatest man they'd ever known. Yep. This person who, on a personal ambition level, they wanted to destroy. They came around and they just had to recognize, like, he's on another level, and I was lucky to serve him.
Have you listened to the podcast series 1865? It's part of the Wondery series.
No.
So it's amazing. It's a scripted show, and it's around, 10 episodes, but it picks up, the whole show starts the night of his assassination. And it really follows, is it Edward Stanton and Seward? Stanton is kind of the key character, but it follows his challenge of keeping the country directed toward the goal and the direction that Lincoln had laid out without Lincoln there. It's really well done. I'd certainly recommend it for anybody that loves Abraham Lincoln.
Okay, 1865.
1865, yeah. As two history majors, we could answer this. We could go on around and around on this question.
You were history at A&M?
Yeah.
Oh, awesome. Did
Yeah.
you focus on any particular area?
No, as an undergrad, we just had to have classes at all the different levels, advanced
Yeah.
levels. My closest thing I had to any sort of focus was I took 2 classes on Soviet history. I am far from a Soviet history expert. It was interesting at that time. What really fascinated me was I became fascinated with timelines at that time, and I never thought of it in that way, but every point in time something has happened before that's led up to that, right?
Hmm.
And the individuals, their personal feelings, the sort of societal or the cultural effects that led up to it. And so even studying Soviet history, the Bolshevik Revolution and then the Vietnam and then followed by the war in Afghanistan, sort of all of those different moments that Soviets were involved with, they weren't points just because of what was happening then. It was generations and centuries of sort of history that led up to those decisions. And so, anyways, that was the closest thing I came to it. But it was really I loved my classes.
Yeah, history. I mean, it's one of the liberal arts, not one of the traditional ones, but it's kind of become a part of that whole set of tools and understandings for interpreting the world
Mhm.
wisely. And I've definitely found that. Well, you should probably ask other people. I think that's been the case for me as a student of history, that it's been a formation that's allowed me to operate in the world in a way that is not just looking at what's right in front of me.
I think it also sort of allows you to build empathy in your life, right? Because
Mm.
you think about, somebody like Abe Lincoln, all the people sort of around in his life. If you look at him, take him at face value, this is the act that they had that left a legacy on history. And that's what we know about. But when you go in and you study about them, you learn about their lives, you can't help but become empathetic to what the effects were on their life, who the people around them, the circumstances that led them to make those decisions, and just have a better understanding of them. And I think, that empathy then applies today, right? When I'm meeting with donors and in my old job is when I was waiting tables and, when you were laying wood and different things like that. It just, I love it. And I hope that more people appreciate the role that studying history can help in their lives.
Yeah, agreed. And I wonder, and I know we have other questions, but I wonder if as you've gotten older, like me, you've gravitated towards biography
Hmm.
as your primary way of consuming history,
I love biographies. Yeah.
in large part for the reasons you just described. I love getting into that complexity because we have our day jobs and what we may or may not be remembered for 40 years from now, 100 years from now, and then but our lives are so much more than that. And it's so fascinating to see how quote unquote great men, they lived and breathed in their times, and made mistakes and made the most of things, and then here we are reading about them.
Just a quick plug for our other podcast. Me and 3 other guys host a podcast called Holy Donors, where we do biographical digs into people throughout history and specifically, kind of telling the story of their philanthropy. I mean, that project kind of started off as this would be fun to do. And it's become just tremendously close to my heart just because I'm learning about, we've highlighted some of the classic philanthropists, Catherine Drexel, Danny Thomas, who founded St. Jude's, done Babe Ruth. But then we have also done sort of lesser known characters like Tim Scanlon, who was a city builder for the city of Houston, done Pierre Toussaint, a Haitian slave who earned his freedom and started Catholic Charities in New York. We've done Catherine Doherty, who was a woman of minor nobility who lost everything and became basically a peasant, and then sort of built it all back up and gave it away again. So, anyways, just
Mm,
fascinating stories that you learn so much about today's world by going back and studying the people that came before us, and I think it's really fascinating.
that's awesome.
Great. Okay. Well, if that's what question one was, we could be looking for a long lightning round here, right?
Oh yes, it's the lightning round.
Question two. If you could get a donor meeting with anyone in the world, living or dead, who would it be with?
Where I'd be asking them to donate.
Hmm.
Okay, I feel like Warren Buffett would understand what we're doing.
There you go. I think that's a solid answer. Question number three. Is there enough money out there for every organization that's doing good work?
Wow, I don't know, and I feel like that calculation would involve some like Nobel level like curve on a graph. I've always thought that money follows vision. So whether you want to look at it through the lens of faith, seek first the kingdom, and the rest will fall into place, or you want to just look at it as, hey, you have a good idea. the money will find you. I have to believe that if you have a clear, compelling vision that speaks to the deep needs of your time, you'll have what you need. And at least to get started, and then as you take steps.
I love it. Question number 4. If you could go back in time and offer yourself one piece of advice, what would it be?
Probably to remember that my first ministry is to my family, which I don't do horrible at. I don't want to do a job that I just go, I have the skill, it could be the next guy, but it's me. I'm going to use this skill, and there's my paycheck. And, this is not who I am. This is not close to my heart. Although the older I get, I recognize that you can bring your heart to all sorts of things, just things I would never want to bring my heart to. That's maybe a little simplistic in my thinking now, but I think I would remind myself, just like we were saying, and I was talking with my brother about this last week. We're like, I think we know one of our great grandparents' names, and that's our family. And we have 4 grandparents, so there's 8 of those. It's not like, this is not a lot of people, and they didn't live so long ago. And I don't know but one of their names. I don't know what their neighbors thought of them. I don't know if the people at their places of work were impressed. I don't know what their ending bank account was. And it's just like, oh my goodness. It's been so easy at times, because I'm doing good work, to forget the great work that is teaching and leading and serving my family. So that's always something that I need to remember, if only because of my limited capacity to do only one thing at a time.
Yeah.
So I get in the track, and then I need to remember to shift tracks better.
I think that's really powerful, and that's a keen insight that I would say that I'm guilty of, is the knowing the great grandparents and just sort of the heritage and where we come from. And here we are talking about biographies and studying really important men and women throughout history, and very important men and women in our own past and our own family, that sometimes it's important to spend time learning about.
Well, let me nuance that, because that's not what I meant.
Oh, sorry.
Even though that's true.
Yes.
We'll call that lesson B.
Okay.
Lesson A is, I don't care, and it doesn't affect me day to day, that one of my great grandfathers was highly respected in his community. That phrase. What does affect me is the father he was to my grandfather, who was the father of my that. And so just kind of I don't have to accomplish, or it's secondary to accomplish other things if I'm not leading in my own family. But then B would be like, oh gosh, I'm so suburban and disconnected from my roots. Yes, definitely part B.
Great, I love it. All right, question number 5. Who are 3 people who have most influenced your professional development?
Wow, I would say the 3 principals I worked for. That's probably a good way to frame it. Dwayne Stutzman, he was the principal at the school I graduated from and then worked that year after college in Oregon. Tim Peterson at John the 23rd, and then Brenda Davidson here at Aristoi. Learned a lot from all of them.
Awesome. Question number 6. What is something interesting about you that people may not know?
I'm a gardener, and I have a tendency to take it probably too far. Like, I'm always trying to turn our houses into farms.
Okay.
And I do. Like, I literally do. Our house in Katy, and then in San Antonio, just typical suburban lots in San Antonio. I think we had 18 fruit trees, strategically placed.
Wow.
Yeah, I actually fairly tastefully done, with how I had the landscaping laid out. And then, like I was telling you before we started, we just moved into a house we bought here in October, and I'm walking it. I'm seeing how the sun hits at different seasons, how the water flows, what the soil's like. So I'm going to try to do the same thing, but satisfy my kids and my wife by, not just making it crazy, but leaving some lawn, tastefully landscaping it, and not just kind of experimenting with farming.
Were your parents gardeners? Is that where you got this from, or were you?
No, I think it's the same tendency that serves me in leading schools. Just seeing the big picture and complementary systems. There's a philosophy of gardening and farming called permaculture, where you try to lightly alter the landscape and plant things in such a way that there are, as much as possible, nearly symbiotic and self-perpetuating systems. And so that's fascinated me as an adult. When I was young, I liked plants, but it's kind of grown into that.
That's awesome. Cool. We'll have to talk about that. I am not a gardener. My one attempt at making a raised bed at my house went very poorly, but, but maybe there's some lessons that I can learn to make it go a little bit better.
Well, there's a saying, how do you become a great gardener?
Mhm.
Kill a lot of plants.
Okay.
You just that's the journey.
I'm well on my way then. That gives me hope.
Yeah.
Talking about fruit trees, one story real quick. When I was at the Newman Center at Ohio State, we had a couple and got to know them pretty well. And they hosted an event at their house, and they had in the front yard, kind of on the side yard, they had this apple tree. And I said, "Oh, apple trees." And he says, "Yeah, you don't want to eat those. They're terrible." And I said, "They're terrible?" And he said, "Yeah." He said, "Years ago, we planted that apple tree, and it was still very young and growing. And my daughter she lived in the second floor, and her room faced that tree. And so some silly boy came over and was trying to get her attention, and so kept breaking off pieces of the top of the tree and throwing him at the window to get her attention. And somehow, and you may know this, but somehow what he did to the tree affected its ability to produce sweet fruit for the rest of its life. So it still made fruit, but the fruit was, I don't know if it was sour or bitter or disgusting, but
Oh no,
whatever it did, it ruined the tree forever.
I've never heard of that actually.
Yeah, it's my apple tree story. Last question, number 7. What is one book do you think everyone should read?
Okay, so I saw this on your list. I'm like, that's gonna kill me.
The anxiety kicks in. Right?
So I mean, I can't do that. I'm just gonna say.
That's
I would point people toward Moby Dick. I'd point people toward Seven Story Mountain, Rule of Benedict. There's a book that I reread every couple of years, Early Mornings, which is Kim Stafford's biography of his father, William Stafford, the great American poet, better known in the Western United States, but just a great and beautiful book. This question is tough, but those are some. I'm a Cormac McCarthy fan. At age 89, just published what will probably be his last 2 novels. Yeah, anything on the Aristoi reading list.
awesome. Great. Well, Mr. Watson, this has been fantastic. I have certainly enjoyed our conversation, and hopefully it's been enlightening for our listeners to learn about charter schools, about classical education, about how to how to weave a journey in life throughout multiple different pathways. And I think it's been really, really enjoyable. If people want to get in touch with you or learn more about the work that you're doing at Aristoi, how can they track you down?
So you can just go to the Aristoi website, and you can email, or there's phone number on there. I would love to talk with anyone who's interested.
Great. And we'll put that link in the show notes to Aristoi Classical Academy. It has been a pleasure. I have certainly enjoyed it. Thank you very much for being a guest on the show and for sharing your insights and your thoughts. And like I said, we'll have to have you back on down the road when we have some success to share with our listeners.
Great. Well, thank you. I've really enjoyed it and appreciated the opportunity.
Great. And for all those listening, thank you for joining me. If you have any questions, you can email us at podcast@petrusdevelopment.com. Otherwise, thank you for joining. God bless you. God bless your work. And we'll see you next time. Well, thanks for sticking around for my takeaways from my discussion with Mr. Watson. There's a lot to unpack here, so let's get started. My first takeaway from my interview with Mr. Watson takes us back to one of my favorite subjects, the importance of a clear mission and messaging. We've been over this many times before, but Mr. Watson brought it up in conversation yet again when he talks about fundraising for Aristoi. He credits Aristoi's success in fundraising to its strength of vision. As a charter school offering a classical education, Aristoi knows clearly why it exists as an alternative to traditional public education. Knowing the mission, however, is only half the battle. Once you have a clear mission, you have to be able to effectively communicate it. I said it during my interview with Mr. Watson, and I'll say it again now. No good fundraising starts without a compelling vision and a clear message to share that vision. Thus, to all fundraisers who are listening to this podcast, I challenge you once again to review your mission and your message. If you find that you fumble in your messaging of your mission, work to fine-tune your communication. The importance of clear and concise mission and messaging cannot be overstated. During our chat, Mr. Watson also described how he successfully shares Aristoi's mission, and from this part of our conversation, I share my second takeaway. When he describes the challenges that Aristoi faces as a charter school, one of the ones he mentions is the lack of a student body zoned to the Aristoi academies. Instead, Aristoi gathers students and funds from the community at large, not a specific neighborhood. To be successful at recruiting students and funds, Mr. Watson and other leaders must rely on their relationship-building skills to invite people in. As fundraisers, we know that relationships are key to our success. Donors prefer to give to organizations that care about them and that encourage participation and engagement. By and large, we as humans are social creatures who are drawn to relationships and find joy in community. By building relationships with our donors, we gain friends and we increase our fundraising success. Finally, it's rare that I find my takeaways in the lightning round, but my lightning round questions with Mr. Watson inspired more discussion than usual, and thus I take my third takeaway from the lightning round. Again, I love being able to chat with Mr. Watson about history and the benefits I've seen from my time as a history scholar. Could you tell how excited I was? In discussing history, however, I think we hit on a topic that can be very applicable for fundraisers: timelines. As I mentioned to Mr. Watson, I'm fascinated by timelines and the idea that, for every point in time, something has happened that led up to that. Individuals, past events, and cultural circumstances all come together at the table to affect how current events will play out. Everything is intertwined. We need to understand how this plays out in fundraising too. When we approach a donor or sit in on a donor meeting, there are so many more factors at play than just what is happening at that very moment. That donor has preconceived notions about what you do. They have previous positive and negative experience with your organizations and with others. They might have relationships with other benefactors or program participants, and they have their own personal circumstances that affect their ability to give. All of that comes together to impact the donor's response to you. Sometimes those outside forces on a donor's timeline are more powerful than you realize. And as fundraisers, we really have to take time to pay attention to clues that donors give us about all the factors affecting their ability to give. Well, that's all for today. Thank you for joining me for this discussion. I sure hope you enjoyed it. Be sure to subscribe to this show and our other shows, Holy Donors and Women in Philanthropy. Also, check out our website for information about upcoming events. Thanks, and God bless.
I'm so glad that you could join us for this episode of the Petrus Development Show. Do you know anybody whose ministry needs to take their fundraising to the next level? Please pass along this show to them. And if you haven't already, take a minute and do 3 things. Subscribe to the podcast so you never miss an episode. If you like the show, give us a 5-star rating and leave us a review. And check out our website, petrusdevelopment.com. Your ministry and the kingdom need good people doing great development work, and your donors receive just as much benefit from giving as your organization does from receiving. And as it says in Luke 5, cast your nets out into the deep. Be bold and the Lord will provide. God bless, and we'll see you next time.